Praise the Lord, everyone. Sorry we're getting started a minute or two late, but we are wearing many hats today. So it is good, though, to be in the house of the Lord. Thank you, Brother Ross. Very much appreciate it. And we are finishing this week on our series on parenting. I was talking to some of y'all beforehand. I feel like I could go another... Well, I was telling Elijah this is part 7 for the title for the live stream. And Angelo joked with me, part 17. I was like, you giving me 10 more? I'll take them. But Elijah, were you able to pull up the slides? All right. We'll see if he can pull down the... Wonderful. There it is. We're going to put too many things into one lesson today. But I wanted to... We've spent a number of weeks talking about discipline, and we've talked about specific tools of discipline, and I wanted to touch on the last and I think most important one that we don't always think of as a tool for discipline, but it is the most effective tool for good discipline, and that is conversation and lecture, but primarily conversation. And then I want to talk a little bit on communication. We're going to bleed those kind of over, because that's really what we're trying to do with this tool of discipline conversation, is to establish a pattern of healthy communication with our children where we can teach them and talk into their life. And then we'll touch briefly on what do we do at the end as they get older. All of this really has been leading up to that. You've seen it from the very beginning. Elijah, if you go to the next slide, we have this recap of our foundational principles that we're talking through, and I'm not going to go through all of them. You can catch it online. All the previous lessons are online, including part 2 that was missing for so long. It's finally up. So if you missed it, you can go see it. And parts 1 and 2 really were the foundation for all of the remaining discussion. But I'll point out, from the very beginning, we talked about autonomy versus dependence. We talked about freedom of choice. We talked about them being full people from birth. We talked about the main goal being to raise responsible, well-rounded, capable adults that have self-control, can make their own decisions. So if you've been paying attention, I have been approaching parenting from the goal in mind. I've worked my way backwards. What is the goal I'm trying to achieve? What does it look like when I'm done? And that's one of the keys about parenting, is there comes a point, you will always be a parent, but there comes a point where the parenting is done, at least in the main. So we'll touch on that a little bit here at the end. All right, let's go forward and touch on conversation as a tool for discipline. I mentioned this briefly last time, that rational, logical, empathetic communication is the standard for healthy relationships. It is the best way to maintain healthy relationships. That's why we have cliches, right? It's all about communication, right? What do you need to do to improve your marriage? Better communication. Your parenting, better communication. And it gets almost cliche, but the truth is, the best way to improve pretty much any relationship between two rational beings, not just humans, but even between us and God, is communication. That is the gold standard for healthy, growing relationships. And so this is our best and most effective tool for disciplining our children. With this process of conversation and lecture, and I'm making this specific because we should be having conversation and talking to our children as a regular course of our day, I assume, right? But a lot of times it's around activities or it's around specific things. And here I'm talking specifically about an intentional conversation you're having in light of something you're trying to teach them. Usually, especially as they're small, in response to activities that we've just had to maybe use some other tools of discipline for as well. We're going to have the spanking and then the conversation. Or you got grounded, you got time out, and now you're out, let's talk about it. And the goal as they get older is to shift almost all of it to this. Because once they become adults, this is all you've got left. Right? They become adults, they have their own rights, they can move away, they can do whatever they want. And the only thing you have left is conversation. And so if you've learned how to build a strong relationship with them, then you have that going forward as they're adults. But if you don't, then you're not going to be able to spank your 20-year-old, nor should you want to. That's not healthy. But we'll get to that. Okay, so a couple things about this. One is in conversation and lecture, when I listen to you, when I understand what you're thinking, what you're feeling, when I talk to you, I explain what I'm thinking and feeling, then we can come to a shared understanding, right? And through this process, we can teach our children about the world, about themselves, and the people that inhabit it. I think I wrote those the other way around. We can teach our children about the world, about the other people that inhabit it, and we can teach them about themselves. We mentioned this last time. A lot of the behavior, bad behavior, is born from unmet needs. Not necessarily even wants. It's things that children need, and they're not getting for one reason or another. And one of the most difficult aspects of parenting is our children often don't know what they need, or they can't express what they need, or in a way that maybe because they just can't physically at all, or they don't know how to do so in a way that they feel safe to do. For example, babies only cry. And we as parents have to figure out what the cry means, if it means anything at all. So I don't know about y'all, maybe y'all figured it out and you can tell it. But for me, like if the kid's crying, I have a checklist. Okay, is there a diaper that needs to change? Nope. Okay, are they uncomfortable? Is something pinching them? They're hurting? Nope. When's the last time they ate? Okay, I'm running through a checklist. Why are they crying? And then of course, like with Elijah, well, he's just crying. Like his stomach hurts. He's colicky. There's nothing I can do about it. But he can't tell me. That's one of the most beautiful things about children as they grow, and why my wife will back me up on this. I've often told her, I'm very interested in raising children. I'm not really a dog person. I'm not against dogs. We have 2 dogs. Those are her dogs. I love the dogs. I play with the dogs. I give them. But the thing is, I will never be able to teach them the way I can teach a kid. I can train a dog. Right. I can't teach a dog. Dogs are perennially toddlers. They never get past that. Right. Whereas children do. And it's a wonderful time when they do. So, a lot of bad behavior is born from unmet needs. We can bless our children with the gift of self-understanding, but it requires that we invest the time to understand them. And that's hard. It requires empathy. It requires us to get beyond our own emotional needs. It requires us not to project our own emotions, but to really try and figure out what's going on with them, so I can teach them how to understand themselves. Personal experience is a wonderful guide here. Chances are your kids are a lot like you. They're your kids. They're not my kids. So don't be afraid to share with them, as is appropriate, your own life experience. If they're dealing with anger, share them the times you've dealt with anger and how it made you feel. Now, you have to remember, they're not you. So, don't tell them what they're thinking, but tell them what you thought and why you thought that and what you did about it. Help them to understand your thought process, and chances are that's going to be a pretty good guide to them understanding their own thought process. With Adele, that was one of the things that we have a very close bond, partially because I've shared with her, Adele, when I was a kid, your age, anger was my thing I struggled with. And here's what my dad had to tell me, and here's what I learned and why I was angry. And I'm talking her through, and now she understands herself better because she can examine her own process, her own emotions, her own thoughts, in this mirror that I've given her of mine, and say, okay, oh yeah, that's what I feel too. Oh, that's different, but I understand. I'm helping her to understand through my own experience. Or for example, I found that I need 8 hours of sleep to be well rested and nice in the morning. Or sometimes when I get really angry about the small things, I realize it's because I'm actually hungry and it's making me angry. Like these kind of things that you learn about yourself, teach your children. Help them to see it in them. They're not exactly like you. They're not going to struggle with exactly the same things. And it is important that we don't assume we know what they're thinking or feeling or going through. But often we do have a lot of insight into their journey that they don't have because we've been there, because we've done it. And so we can provide that insight and help them to navigate their own thoughts, help them to understand their own thoughts. I'll give you one more example here, and then we'll go on to the next slide. So this also gives you a chance to reinforce truths, to explain in a way that is tied to something they're going through right now. And this is something you want to start as early as you possibly can, probably earlier than you think. I would recommend, even as early as 3 and 4, start explaining things to them, start talking through. Now you'll pick up that they're not catching everything, and so I'm not saying sit down and give them a 2-hour lecture on moral philosophy and lead to why they shouldn't steal, right? Probably appropriate for a 3-year-old, but tell them, even if they're not going to understand, because you're going to keep telling them and they're going to start understanding, but you don't know when that happens. So it's better to give them the explanation early and gauge based on what the feedback you get. Let me give you an example here Maybe I should have framed the intro to conversation a bit more. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about, for example, let's take an example, and I asked Adele about this, so she's okay with me sharing it. Something happened. She blew up at her siblings. They had a fight. They all blew up at each other, but Adele's the one who exploded and was screaming, and I sent her to a room, and she was defiant against me, and so we had this whole thing where ultimately she runs up to the room, slams the door, and it's like, okay, like, we're at the point, like, I'm not going to spank her because I've realized it's not effective. What I am going to do is I'm going to simmer for a little bit, and then I'm going to go in there, and we're going to talk. And she doesn't want to talk, but I'm going to make her talk, and I'll touch on that and hear it. And in that particular one, this was so fascinating because I was trying to get her to understand, like, her behavior was completely unacceptable, and it was her fault at the beginning. Like, she was the cause of all of this. The anger afterwards, but even the initial problem that led to the fight. She instigated it. So I was trying to talk to her through it, and I couldn't get her to talk about anything. She didn't want to talk about it. It didn't happen. It wasn't there. It's like, Adele, I watched it happen. Like, you just slammed it. Why are you? She's under her cover. She doesn't want to show her face. She's not, like, completely checked out. And what I realized was she's ashamed. She's ashamed of her behavior. She's not happy that she was angry. She knows that she caused this. She knows that she responded inappropriately. She's old enough to realize I messed up. And when I messed up, I doubled down on my mistake, and I made it worse. So, and again, remember, children's emotions, sometimes it's like, why are they blowing up over such a little thing? Because that's the whole extent. Like, in her mind, this is the worst thing that she's ever done. Right? She has transgressed, betrayed her family, because what kind of person does that? Purposely provokes their siblings and then screams and blows up. And so, this is a big deal. From our point of view, those are small emotions. Small things. I don't understand why it's so emotional. But we have to remember that, like, just because it's not a big deal to us doesn't mean it's not a big deal to them. We have a much broader range of experiences. So the things that are going to get me so riled up that I scream are that's a very high bar, right? Whereas for our children, they have such a smaller range of. So anyways, she's, this is, from her mind, she doesn't want to face what happened. And I did this thing where I realized, okay, let me talk about someone I know, Adele. Their name is Babel. And we're going to talk about what they did. And so I made up this fictional person that wasn't Adele, technically, and I talked to her about that person's behavior and what they did and why it was a problem, what they should have done. And we had a very productive conversation, and she was able to engage because it was enough for her to not feel like she was the one being directly attacked, right? And then after probably this 45-minute conversation, I finished, and we came to a good place and gave her a hug. I said, now, just to make sure we're clear, but Belle is really Adele, right? And of course, she's ashamed. It's like, I don't want to cause, split personality disorder here. But you have to get creative. Like, and I don't know if that particular tactic will work for all of you, for your kids, but try and figure out what's going on. More than just the defiance and the problem thing. The reason she doesn't want to talk to me is because she's ashamed. Because she doesn't want to be the person that she is. And doesn't that sum up all of us when we look at our life? One way you could describe my life is I am constantly trying to become the person I'm not. Right? I'm trying to find my strengths and get better. I'm trying to find my weaknesses and eliminate them. And I want to be more like him and less like default Jonathan. And so point is, you have to be sensitive to your children and find a way to get through to them. You know them. Trust that. So this process of conversation afterwards also gives you the chance to reinforce multiple important messages. God loves you. I love you. That's why we're having this conversation. You're not bad. Your behavior was bad. Your choice was bad, but that doesn't mean you inherently are bad. Now, bad choices do lead to bad outcomes. You can become and grow into a bad guy if you make a lifestyle out of bad choices. But you have the power to choose. I'm in your corner. I'm here to help you. I will help you make good choices if you let me. These are all the motivations behind the conversation you want to have. All right, so let's talk about some practical tips how to do this. First, I know there's tiny slides. I will make available not just the slides, but notes. First, listen to understand their thoughts and emotions. As I mentioned, the first thing is I have to understand them. If I just come in guns blazing with this is what should happen, this is what should happen, do this, then I'm unlikely to have a productive conversation, because the goal of this conversation is not to gain compliance. The goal of this conversation is to come to shared understanding, right? It drives back to one of those other principles. We're shooting for right thinking with the expectation that if we can get right thinking, that will lead to right behavior. But I'm not just trying to gain compliance, I'm trying to gain understanding. Me of them and them of me. So I'll even ask them probing questions to help them work through their emotions. How do you feel? Are you feeling angry? Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling something new that you don't understand? What's it like? Why do you feel that way? Could it be you're anxious because of XYZ? Or maybe you're upset because of GHF or whatever it is. Why? Well, why not? You look angry, but you're telling me you're not angry. Okay, well, what are you? Why are you acting angry if you don't feel angry? Are you acting angry because you feel sad? Okay, this is important stuff for you to figure out about yourself and for me to understand about you, right? Then you want to help them to connect and to think through the consequences of their behavior by, again, asking lots of questions. Okay, you screamed at your siblings. Well, let's imagine that you're an adult and you're working in a job. Or, if it was me, what would happen if I went into my work and screamed at all my coworkers? What do you think would happen? What are the consequences? Okay, how do you think what you did made the other person feel? Walk them through the process of looking at the consequences of their actions and force them to make the connections. This is, if you want to do a really nerdy study, you can look up the Socratic method, right? But the idea is, I'm not giving you the answers. I'm giving you the questions that lead you on a path for you to find the answers. Why is this behavior a problem? Well, what would happen if you did it here? What would happen if you did it to someone who also gets just as angry? What if two of you got together and you both blew up? Talk it through. Help them to identify and distill the core principle governing this choice. This is a full lesson for another day. Emotions are an input, not a decision. And our world gets that backwards. It's not that we should ignore our emotions, we should listen to our emotions, but we listen to our emotions and then we choose what to do in response. We don't just respond out of emotion. And this is a mantra that I've given to my children, and they can probably recite it if you start it for them. I can't always control how I feel, but I can control what I do, and what I do will change how I feel. Other similar principles: respect must be earned. It can be loaned, but ultimately it must be earned. Everyone is loved by God. We should love people the way that God loves people. We have to be patient and wait our turn. We want a fair chance to play with the toys, so we should give them a fair chance. Identify the core principles. What is the reason that what you did is unacceptable? And let's talk about why that matters. Well, if you don't, you can't just take the toy out of the other kid's hand. What if it was you? If you were playing with it, would you want them to do that? Well, no. What would you want them to do? Well, never play with it. Okay, we'll turn it back around. Is that how you want to be? You never get the toy because someone else... Okay, so let's reason through this. What makes sense? Help them to think about the core principles. Another thing I'll say that's very important when you're having this conversation, because especially, again, you need to have your radar up and your feelers out for all their emotions, for their things, because I'm trying to make sure this is effective. I don't want to just drone at them for an hour and they're checked out and nothing matters, nothing happens, right? I've wasted my time, I've wasted their time, and what I've taught them is, I'm not an effective communicator. We can't have an effective relationship. That's what I'm teaching them if we don't have a... So if the conversation's not effective, let's stop, back up, figure out why. One of the tools I'll use to do that is have them echo back what they heard. Don't just repeat to me, but explain to me what you heard me say. This works great in adult relationships too, especially if you feel like people never understand what you're saying. You have to find a way to be polite about it, but this is a good way. Or if you're trying to hold someone else accountable for what they're saying, rather than challenging them, a lot of times you can say, okay, what I thought you said was this. Is that right, or did I misunderstand? Right? Because then you're giving them an out. Anyways, that's not what I'm talking about. So depending on how old they are, I'll often ask them to articulate back to me the lesson I'm trying to teach. Okay, why do we do this? What are the consequences in real life of this behavior? What are the consequences of the opposite? Talk me through. Don't just repeat what I said, but repeat the logic. Talk me back through what we just talked about. Do you really understand what I said? No, you don't? Okay, and this is where you can use the boring nature of lecture to your advantage. Because what you can show them is, if you don't pay attention, we're just going to do this again until you can tell me. Right? Again, you have to gauge with your kid, right? If it's a 3-year-old, that might not be effective to keep them there for 2 hours. You might have to. But this is the general principle: is if you're not paying enough attention to explain to me, then we're just going to go through this again until you do. So it's in your best interest to listen intently the first time, and then we can move past it. Especially if, like for Adele or others, it's an emotional conversation, it's not fun. You can even use that. Say, look, I know we don't like to talk about this. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm not trying to make you, but we have to talk about this. So let's pay close attention. Let's really think, and let's just do this once so we don't have to come back to it. So have them echo back. Make sure this is actually working. And then I already touched on this. If they're old enough for this to work, treat it like a timeout. This probably doesn't work, like I said, for a 3-year-old, for a 4-year-old, for a 5-year-old, but even at 6, depending, it might. And I've done this with our children where it's like, Dad, I'm tired, I want to take a nap. Okay, I get it, it's emotional. You can take a nap after we have this conversation. Or they really are so tired that they're getting incoherent. Okay, you take a nap. When you wake up, we're going to have this conversation. Like, you do not get to go on with the rest of your day until we have this conversation. Now, I will point out, and this is where, again, principles you have to apply to your situation. This is difficult if you can't have this time. And this is one of those things, again, coming to the principles. What are my priorities in life? That was one of my first principles. God, my spouse, my family, then ministry, then work. There have been times I've been late to meetings, and I've had to call in and say, hey, I'm going to miss this one, or can we reschedule? Because, I realize I have to have a conversation with one of my children right now, and if I miss this opportunity, I'm going to miss the right time to talk about this. It's going to move past. And they are more important than this meeting. Now, in American culture, that's very hard to say and hard to do, which I'll just give a sidebar. If you're good at your job and your employer likes you and you've shown your value, you have the leverage to do this. You can't do it all the time, but you have the leverage to do this. And you can work, right? If it's a recurring thing, then maybe it's like, it is, okay, I've got to work right now. I've done this too, where, okay, I've got to go to a meeting. I can't put this one off. This is too important. But when we get to the end of the day, we're going to talk about this. But then I've got to reset the context. I've got to get them back in the headspace. And again, that might not work for younger kids. So, you've got to play it by ear. Every situation is different. These are general recommendations. Feel free to adapt them as necessary. So if they're old, treat it like a timeout. I'm not letting you go until we have this conversation. And one of the things I'm trying to do in this conversation is, in love, I'm trying to force them to confront the reality of their emotions and their actions. I'm not going to let you ignore the fact that you were manipulative to your, I know what you did. You manipulated your younger brother because you're older and because you're smarter, and you were able to trick him into doing something he wasn't really, it was in your best interest and not his. You don't get to pretend like you didn't do that. Maybe they didn't intend to. Maybe it was really not intentional, but I'm still going to show you this is what you did. And these are the consequences of that behavior. Because of that, they missed out on this. You had 2 desserts, and your brother didn't have any desserts because you tricked him into giving you his dessert. And how would that feel if it was you? So I'm not trying to beat them up, but I am trying to make, if you remember, one of the principles of discipline was, what's the most effective, see if y'all been paying attention, what's the most effective kind of consequence? Natural consequences. The most effective consequence for discipline is natural consequences. Conversation, I'm going to make sure they don't miss the import of their consequences. This is what happened. Why did you do it? Well, I was angry because, okay, so you were angry. Are they in control of your emotions? Who's in control of your emotions? You are. They can provoke you, but only you can control your emotions. You've got to learn that. So I'm forcing them to confront the reality, because this is a safe place where they can do so. In this kind of conversation, if they get emotional in the conversation, I'm not going to take it personally. If they get mad and upset because I'm forcing them to deal with some hard truths about themselves, I'm not going to take it personally. There still is an appropriate way to talk, but I'm going to be very forgiving of lack of emotional control, because I'm purposely provoking them and pushing them to hard situations, pushing them to a hard conversation. And so a lot of times kids will want to avoid this kind of conversation. That's why Adele says things like, Dad, just give me a spanking, I don't want to have the lecture. because it's emotional work, because it's tough. But what is this teaching them when they get to be an adult? I know how to have hard emotional conversations. I know how to get emotionally provoked. I know how to be upset by something and still control my reaction, still control my tone of voice, the way I talk, because I saw my dad do it, I saw my mom do it. I've been forced to do it myself through this process. I've learned how to control my emotions and handle stressful emotional situations and be under pressure successfully. This is an amazing tool. Like I said, we need to be paying super close attention. Our feelers are up, our radar's out. We're trying to pull in as much as we can. And then as they age, especially when they're very young, these conversations are very much like, let me tell you why what you did is wrong. Let me tell you the way the world is. But as they get older, more and more, it should change to a, what do you think? Well, why did you do that? What was the reasoning? Okay, play it forward. Was that good reasoning? What are the, did you think about this? Did you think about that? Let me help you explore the possible space, because that's setting you up to the point where when you're an adult, they're equipped to make good decisions, and you can still have these conversations because it's a normal pattern. They don't expect that every pattern is dad coming to tell me, you should have done this, you should have done that, you should have done that. It's like, Dad, I'm 35. I know what I'm doing. You've never worked in my career. I have. I know better. Right? But it might be very easier for me to say, well, what happened? Or if there's something they're struggling with, Dad, I'm trying to figure out what to do here, and here's the scenario. What do you think? Because I've modeled that, because we've done that. So as they age, you want to shift towards less direct teaching and more guiding, coaching, counseling. All right, we are through most of our time. I don't want to take too much more than we have. So let me go on to, so that is conversation as a disciplinary tool. I feel like I should have spent the whole time on that because that is the most effective tool. But if you take all the principles and application of the previous ones, think about it, I trust you'll get there. I trust you'll figure out what's right for your family that I don't know what's right for your family because you're there. So let's talk about communication. And we could talk about this all the time. So I'm going to narrowly focus on one thing because I think this is such a huge opportunity sometimes we miss with our children. And that is, it should be a normal part of your relationship with your children that you apologize when you make mistakes. This is, especially in our culture, not normal and very difficult. We hardly apologize to each other as adults when we make mistakes. Our cultural norm is to pretend mistakes didn't happen or go on and find a way to save face without having to directly admit that I made a mistake, right? You make a mistake and you admit it, you could get fired in the right, in some circumstances, in unhealthy jobs which are out there. So, but it's such an incredible thing that we will lose if we don't take advantage of it. Let me talk you through a little bit of the power from apologizing to your children, what you're leaving on the table if you don't do this. One, when you apologize to your children, you're reinforcing the values you teach. This is what's right, not because I say so, but because I actually believe it. And I messed up, and you can see that when I messed up, I actually held myself accountable to the same values, because it's not about what I'm saying, it's about the principle. It's not about me being right, it's about this actually matters. It actually matters not to get angry, because when I get angry and I blow up because I didn't handle the situation right, because you got me so angry, and it's not your fault, it's my fault. We don't get angry, we control our anger. We have a productive way to deal with that legitimate emotion, because that's the value. It's not just about me. So you're reinforcing the values you teach. The other thing is, it shows this need. It's not about my ego. It's about respect and honor. Let me put it this way. I don't want my children's worship. I want their respect. I don't want to be their hero. I want to be their parent. I want them to see Jesus as the hero, the perfect one, not me. Now, at the start, you will be their hero. As a little kid, mom and dad are super people. They are the gold standard for what humans should be. My dad can beat up your dad. No, I can't. But one day you're going to fail them. One day you're going to fall short and not meet their expectations. And if you do it right, this shouldn't shake their confidence. Ironically, the best way to stay their hero long term is to show your faults and your humanity. Because then they see dad's ego was not more important than my relationship. That's the other one here. When I apologize, what I'm telling them is you matter more than my own sense of self and pride. Like, I don't mind humbling myself if it helps you, because I value you more than my own ego. I want your respect and your honor. Apologizing to them validates their emotions. Anger is not a bad emotion. You should feel angry when you're treated wrongly or treated unjustly. That's the natural, godly response. I want them to experience those emotions towards someone they love and learn how to deal with them. How do you keep loving someone? Some of us have dealt with this as adults. Some of us have to deal with this. How do you keep loving someone who hurts you and makes mistakes? How do you continue to care for the people that attack you? Well, if as the parent, I own my own mistakes and the times that I hurt my children, if I'm honest about it, I can teach them. This is a core Christian skill, how to love people that aren't very lovable. It doesn't mean I just let them walk all over me, but I still love them. And I can teach them that by showing them. Your young kids are going to love you no matter what. That's part of how God made them, and that's why abusive parents leave such incredibly deep and lasting scars. Because the children have to reconcile two absolute truths in their mind. One is, I love Dad, and Dad loves me. And two is, Dad hurt me. And as an adult or something, we can handle the gray, we can figure out the nuance, we can understand, well, Dad he didn't mean to, or maybe he did and he's just not, this is something he's not very good at. But kids can't do that. They're black and white. So if they're holding this, I love Dad and Dad hurts me, what's the why? Why does Dad hurt me? Is it because he doesn't love me? That, as a kid, is too painful and damaging to the subconscious for them to contemplate. So most of the time, what kids do is they think it's my fault. Dad hurt me because I'm the bad one. And you see this in children that are raised in abusive homes. They have to unpack this as adults. What they get down to at the core, and they don't even realize it until they've talked for hours with other people to help them unpack this, is I don't love myself. I hate myself because that's what I internalized from my upbringing, was I was the reason the bad things happened, so I realized I'm bad. And that became such a core part of my identity. I built all this stuff on it, and now I haven't to. So, but if we apologize, we can avoid that whole pattern. Yes, Dad hurt you, but it's not because I don't love you. It's because I'm not perfect. I messed up. I made a mistake. But I love you more than my pride. It's embarrassing for me. I'd rather pretend that I didn't mess up. I just hope it goes away, but that's not what our family does. That's not what we do. We address our mistakes. We fix it. Because I love you, and I'd rather be embarrassed than you think that I don't love you, or you think it's your fault. I'm going to tell you that was my fault. I messed up. I'm going to fix it as best I can. I'm going to repent. I'm going to change. I'm going to identify, okay, if I hurt you, that should be a wake-up call to me, like, I'm sorry, and let me go find the help. And it's not your job to fix me. I'm the parent. I'm the adult. Let me go find the help. But I'm going to tell you that. And now you know what it feels. Learn from my mistake. There's another one. They can learn from my mistake. If I hurt you, if I made a mistake, or even if it's not hurting you, if I did something that affects them negatively, let me apologize so you can learn from my mistake. Now you know what this feels like when this happens to you, and that gives you an empathy when the shoe's on the other foot, and you're the one in the position that has to make the right choice. Then you can think, you know what? Like, I remember when Dad did that to me, and he apologized and he made it right, but I remember how that feels. I'm going to be different. Do you want to break abusive cycles in your family history? If you expect to be perfect and never make the hurtful mistakes your parents did, you're going to fail. That's unrealistic. That's how you were raised. It's going to take practice until you're able to exercise those patterns. During that practice, you're going to mess up, and your kids are going to suffer. But you can determine what lesson they take. If you apologize and explain your mistake, not excusing yourself, but taking ownership and explaining what you're going to do to fix it and what you're going to do to change your own behavior, if you talk it through with them, then the abusive pattern dies with you, and your kids don't inherit it. And you can raise children who are the opposite of what you experienced. But if you hide from your failure and don't process it with them, you will teach them to do the same thing. All right, I spent a lot of time on that. Let me touch two other things, and I'll let this go. 1, apologizing validates and reinforces their understanding of your values. Apologizing models humility and repentance. I think I have one more slide on apologizing, and then I will very quickly talk through the last piece. All right, here are what apologizing shows. 1 is, this does not match my notes. People are not perfect. This is important for your kids to know. Parents are the archetypical humans. They're the mom and dad are the way humans are. Back in early childhood, you're still their hero. So it's important for you to model this apologizing thing so they internalize it. Daddy's my hero, and daddy's not perfect. Mommy's my, what's in my notes? Mommy's my world. Mommy apologizes. We normalize it. So when they make mistakes, if we don't apologize, if we never show them our humanity, then what they think is, well, mom and dad, they could do this because they're perfect. They succeeded because they don't make mistakes. But I'm not perfect. So I can't do it. Mom and dad were great, but I can't parent like they did. I can't succeed like they did. I've got to find my own way. And they do have to find their own way, but what I want to show them is mom and dad succeeded because we made mistakes and learned from them. We succeeded because we weren't perfect, and that's okay. So we need to apologize to our children to show them that there's no such thing as perfect people. I see where my notes are there. Things your apologies teach them. 1, it shows them you actually want what's best for them, not just what you want. Because if you were only seeking your own, you wouldn't apologize, right? So you actually want what's best. 2, you actually believe what you're teaching them to the point where it changes your behavior. 3, they're normal. They don't have to be perfect people. It's okay to make mistakes. And 4, these tools work. Like, I'm giving you all these tools to self-discipline, to behave better, to make better choices. And at some point, kids are going to think, well, yeah, this is all whatever, but I can't actually do it. No. I'm doing it, and I'm messing up. But the same tools I'm giving you are the ones that I'm using myself to get through life. 2 other things on apologizing. I already said 2. I need to check my notes. Sometimes we worry that apologizing will undermine our authority. But what apologizing does is it underscores that our authority comes from God and not ourselves. I'm not right because I'm right. I'm right because I'm grounded in the Word of God, in biblical principles, and in what's best for them. When I miss that mark, I adjust. But not apologizing does undermine our authority, because children are smarter than we think. They see more than you think. They think in black and white. They don't appreciate the justifications, but they still see it. So they see that you're holding them to rules and standards that you don't hold yourself to. And then they realize the rules and standards don't matter. It's arbitrary. They start questioning your decisions. You are going to want eventually to have a chance to explain why you believe what you believe, to address their concerns. But you will not have that chance to explain if you've shown them through your example that you cannot be corrected. If you cannot be corrected, then when they disagree with you, they just won't even talk to you. Because it's a foregone conclusion. I can't, like, if I'm right, mom and dad won't listen. And if I'm wrong, they're just going to browbeat me. So I'm pretty sure in this one I'm right. So I'm just going to have this, not worth it. It's easier just to disengage and not talk about this topic because mom and dad can't be corrected. This begins early, but it's a pattern their whole life. All right, can you go to the next slide? One more thing on kind of behavior and principles teaching. The golden, platinum, heavenly rules. Y'all know the golden rule? Who can tell me the golden rule? It's on the slide if you don't know it. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. To really do this requires that you understand yourself and that you really know yourself. Have you ever tried to apply this to children? Well, what if it was you? Wouldn't this make you angry? I don't know if y'all ever heard this. That wouldn't make me angry. I'd be fine with that. You lie. In other words, if we aren't self-aware and honest with ourselves, we twist the golden rule into others should allow me to do whatever the sinless, perfect, ever-patient version of myself would allow them to do. The platinum rule. Have anyone heard of this one? Treat others the way they want to be treated. So the golden rule says, do unto others as you would have them. Like, what do you expect? You should give the same consideration. The platinum rule says, figure out what they want and do that. To do this, number one, this assumes the other person is actually mature and knows what's best for them, which is not always true, because sometimes people want things that are bad for them, and sometimes kids, right? Like, well, what do you want for dinner? Candy. No. So careful with this one, right? But the principle of this one is about respect. And I think a lot of us push back against this kind of rule because oftentimes we know people make bad decisions. I don't want to give you things that I know are bad for you. So yes, we have to treat people in a way that is, we have an obligation to God before we have an obligation to other people. But here's one of the most difficult things for humans to recognize. None of us are truly equipped to know better for someone else than they know for themselves. We are barely equipped to know what's good for us. And that line of thinking, I know better for you than you know for yourself, and so I'm going to make the choice on your behalf because I know better. That line of thinking, coupled with the power to enforce it, leads directly to opposition, slavery, and genocide. And if you think I'm being too extreme, you haven't studied history. Right? Y'all know the quote, we're all equal, Animal Farm, right? We're all equal. Some of us are just more equal than others. I'm not the master. My children are not the slaves. I'm the parent. I'm the teacher. I'm the guide. I'm the one with more experience, but I'm not their master, and I refuse to be their master. When they're young, they're in my charge, and I have a responsibility for them, and I have power over them accordingly. But as early as they can start showing me their ability to handle things well, I'm going to start giving that power to them. We might have to go back and forth until they really know, but I want to give them the power as soon as possible because I have a healthy fear of my own arrogance, of the damage I can cause if I insist on being the master and the ruler. All men and women are created in the image of God. All people are worthy of respect and consideration. All people have the right to make their own choices, have the right to partake in the consequences of their choices. Right? This is a core fundamental value I'm trying to instill in my children. And I think that's the healthy version of the platinum rule. I respect you enough to consider how you want to be treated in my treatment of you. It doesn't mean I can always do what you want me to do because I am accountable to God for my own actions. But as much as I can, I'm going to treat you the way you want to be treated. That's a huge thing for our children as they grow up because to do this well, not only do we have to understand ourselves, but we have to understand them. And the last one, of course, the heavenly rule, I called it that. I don't know if there's a name for it other than this. So if you have a better name, tell it to me. But this is the one Jesus gave you. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you. Love people the way I loved you. Not the way you think they should be loved, not the way you want to be loved, but I'm the standard. The way I loved you, love people that way. Jesus saying that, not me. This is harder than either the golden or the platinum rules because we have to understand ourselves enough to recognize God's love for us. We have to know God well enough to have some understanding of his love for us, and we have to have walked with him long enough to see how that love plays out in practice. Can y'all think, what does it mean as if I'm on a team and I've got a manager, how does God's love practically work itself out in that example? It takes time to, have you thought that through? Has God shown you that kind of thing? But let me give you a quick example. My wife and I share life. We have a front row seat to each other's growing and processes and God teaching us. I know I'm going long. I'll give it back to you in the sermon, I promise. There have been times when my wife is wrestling with something, and after she goes through it and she figures it out, she'll tell me, I don't know how you put up with me. Now, men, if your immediate thought is, man, I wish my wife would say that, then do you actually put up with her? Do you patiently wait, or do you gripe at her, get impatient, and worst of all, try to fix it? Or do you let her fix it? All right, I'll go on. But the golden rule says, I'm willing to be patient with her and put up with her because I want her to be patient with me and put up with me. And newsflash, she's had to put up with at least as much for me as I've had to put up with her. So the platinum rule says, I love her. I want her to feel supported and valued in the way that makes her feel loved and supported. So I'm going to do that. And the heavenly rule says, I know how many times God has been patient and put up with me. I know that he's made me feel loved, accepted, and encouraged afterwards, so I want to make you feel the same. I want to love you the way that God has loved me. And with that, we come full circle back to lesson 2 about unconditional love. It really is the underpinning to all successful parenting. I want to love you, my child, the way that God has loved me, the way that he has shown me and been patient with me and corrected me in love and helped me. That's how I want to love you. All right, final stretch. Letting go. Really, the whole thing, this could have been a whole lesson on its own. It originally was. I may have to revisit this one. This is where we all end up. It's a very easy 3-step process. Number 1, you have to recognize they're going to become adults regardless of what you do. It does not matter how you teach them, if you teach them, if you don't, if you try and hold on to an iron fist, if you let them, doesn't matter. They are going to become adults regardless of what you do. Unless they die, and that's horrible. So you don't want that. That's the only option, right? Sometimes, I know I'm being a little bit, it's a weird thing to say, but we don't think about that. Like, I don't want them to stay children. That's not natural. It's not how it goes. That's death. They need to grow. They will become adults regardless of what we do. So, because of that, my whole parenting is predicated on me preparing them to be adults. To preparing them to be successful, healthy, wonderful adults. And then, when they become adults, I've got to let them be adults. I've got to give them, and if you want the detailed dive, you can probably write it yourself if you go back and take these principles and think through all the discipline stuff. All of it has been about giving them freedom as soon as they're able to safely handle it. Introducing them to topics and talking it through them as soon as they're mature enough to handle it. And then walking it back if they're not. Because my goal is not to shape them into mini me's. My goal is to provide a platform for them to become who God has called them to be. I've got to let them become adults. I'll leave you with one final thought, and then we'll go into our main service. Somewhere along the way, our culture at large has given up on parenting. I think there's one more slide. We've kind of decided there's no right way to parent. You can't do it. Every approach is valid, and I'll kind of go back to that thing I said earlier. I think every parent has the right to parent how they want to parent. That's part of being human. But they're not all equally good. They're not all equally valid. There is a right way. I'm not saying this is prescriptively the right way, what I'm presenting you, but I'm hoping to give you principles to be effective in the way that you choose. But what I've noticed in our world today is that adults are not really prepared to be adults. There's this weird thing happening more and more. Children get to be adults, and they're completely unprepared for adult life. We see that in careers, we see that in jobs, we see that in relationships, right? We even have this word for it, adulting, right? I don't know if I'm prepared to adult today. How many of you who are over 40 have ever used that phrase that way? Okay, got one. Why do people not know how to adult? Because their parents didn't teach them. Why didn't their parents teach them? Because they didn't know. We are like 3 or 4 generations from having principled parenting as a part of our culture. The core of purpose rots first. So, at some point, you had a generation that had intention behind their parenting. And this is generalities. I'm not saying this is universally true. There's definitely, But at some point, we as a culture had this intentionality behind parenting. And we created tools of discipline, tools of parenting for the purpose of teaching them these specific things. We had specific tools. But then, with their children, they didn't transmit the purpose. They just gave them the tools. So the next generation had the tools, but they didn't understand the purpose. And what happens when you have tools without purpose? Well, tools without purpose often do more harm than good. And that's why there's such a pushback in my generation, the generation prior, against a lot of this stuff, is because their parents raised them with the tools, but without the purpose. So it wasn't actually helpful. In many ways, it hurt. So, we're going to throw those tools out. The tools may or may not be good, but what you really need is the purpose. But they weren't parenting purposely. They're just disciplining their children when they do bad things. And as we've explored, that's not effective. So I think we're probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 generations from culture valuing parenthood. We've gotten to a point now where a lot of children are raised in, frankly, unhealthy homes. They aren't given tools to manage their own thoughts because their parents don't know how to manage their thoughts. They aren't taught how to do the hard work of connecting with another person empathetically, to put themselves in other people's shoes and consider the impact of their actions. They're not given guidance on recognizing, handling, managing their emotions. They don't have conversations where their parents tell them, this is normal, these feelings are normal, I felt this, but you have to be careful not to make bad choices. So it's only through painful life circumstances, trauma, theirs or others, that they start learning these things, right? The principles don't go away, consequences is still a thing, but if you don't get taught how to deal with them growing up, you have to learn them in real life. The whole point of a lot of this parenting is to give them a place to learn this stuff so that when real life hits them, they know what to do. But we don't, so real life hits them, they don't. And don't misunderstand what I'm about to say. I'm in favor of counseling, of therapists. I think it's a good thing. I would encourage you to see them if you have any reason to think you might. Even if you just go and they say, you know what, actually I think you need this, just go. It doesn't hurt. So don't misunderstand what I'm about to say. But I think a lot of therapists' time is just spent on teaching people basic life skills. In fact, I know this because I have a number of friends who are therapists, and it's amazing. They say, yeah, like 60% of my practice is just teaching people basic life skills they didn't learn. And dealing with all the trauma of them having to make their way through life without these basic life skills. So this is what happens, right? It's not that we've replaced parents with therapists, it's that we as a society have given up on parenting. So now when children get to be adults, as a direct result of their lack of training and lack of practice making healthy choices, they get hurt. They hurt themselves, other people hurt them, they allow other people to hurt them, or they act in a way that hurt other people. And where do we turn? Therapists. This is why we have such a rise of therapists. Again, I'm thankful for therapists. I just wish as a society we were raising people in a healthy environment. It's almost like it's normal for kids to break, to lose an arm. Like most people get to adulthood with only 3 limbs. And then you see this one person who made it with 4 limbs and you're like, whoa, you're weird. That's not normal. Like my parents just took me to we go to so we have huge amounts of doctors that deal with prosthetics, and that's the normal thing in our culture is this prosthetic because everyone walks around with missing limbs. You see this random person that has 4, and people think, well, they just got lucky. Well, no, my parents protected me. I didn't play with a wood chipper at 5. I didn't play with a table saw at 10 years old. They gave me basic practices that helped me to live without losing my limbs. But we as a society don't do that, so we've normalized growing up with missing limbs. That's what we've done emotionally. So I'm not against therapists. Praise the Lord that we have people that are taking this seriously, taking mental health seriously. But I just wish we did a better job of preventing injury because it's preventable through effective parenting. It's fine, everyone has a few major concussions and broken bones and missing limbs by the way to adulthood. That's just part of being a kid. No. So, wrapping this up, coming back to those kids as they become adults. They get into therapy, they realize, hey, a lot of the discipline that I was receiving was ineffective at best, often harmful, because their parents didn't know. Hurt people, right? This is where that everyone screws up their kid mentality comes from. I disagree with that so strongly. You do not have to screw up your kid. Everyone makes mistakes, which is why you apologize. And your apology can mitigate the impact of your mistakes. It can turn it into a teaching. I already talked about that. I won't go over. Not everyone has to screw up their kids. But the problem is, the parents don't have an understanding of why they are disciplining or of what they're trying to achieve. But then the kids become adults and realize, Dad never told me he loved me. Dad never showed me that he cared. And hence we have, and again, this could be a whole other topic, we have this rising epidemic of parental abandonment and estrangement. And sometimes we think, well, the kids are just, I don't know what's wrong with kids these days. They don't love their parents, they're just, well, no, what the kids are realizing is, you hurt me in ways that you never apologized for, and you still don't even realize you're doing it right now. But I'm trying to get healthy. I'm trying to learn these skills, and the only way I can do that is to cut contact with you because you are the source of a lot of my trauma, and it's still ongoing. Now, I'm not saying that's all entirely a healthy situation. What's the point of what I'm saying right now? We have to learn how to be good parents. It doesn't come naturally. There is always hope. There's always hope. Even if your kids are grown and you're listening to this, if there's someone online listening to this and you're thinking, wow, what do I do? It's too late. It's done. No, it's not too late. You can't undo the past, but you can chart a new path into the future. And it is as much in their hands as it is yours. So you're no longer in control, but you can still try to make things better. But what I want us as a church to be doing, as a community to be doing, is giving our children the tools to be successful emotionally, mentally, physically, in their careers, in their relationships. Our children can grow up to be strong, effective, well-rounded people. And that is our responsibility. Not entirely. They share this responsibility. But it is, in much ways, our responsibility. So I guess my thought here is to motivate you. We want to parent with the end goal in mind. I want to parent so that my kids grow up and say, thank you, Lord, for my parents that loved me enough to stick with me, to make time for me, to put in the difficult hours of conversation, to listen to me, to understand me, to value me enough to give me the tools to be effective now. It's not easy, but it's worth it. I love you. I appreciate so much your time today. I know we are well over. I do promise I'll give it back in our sermon here. But if you're online watching later, that might not help. I hope this has been a valuable series. I'm sure I will revisit it. I'm still in the process of putting together all of my notes, so if you wanted my slides, you'll have them. I'll also give you all my notes that was driving that, kind of in an organized form. I love you. I want to see your children grow. I want to see your family grow. We'll take a few minutes and we'll go into our main service.